He was a bit of an exception in recent times in terms of the fact that he had served previously and so therefore had specialist knowledge of defence. But that's not always wanted by military chiefs, who find it quite annoying when someone who was a junior officer like Ben Wallace had been, he left as a captain, is then trying to use military strategy when that really should be the job of the military chiefs. And the politicians are to be advised by their military chiefs and then make the political decisions. However, it's a balance. And the reality is that Ben Wallace really cared about defence. The fact that he really stuck his neck out at times and tried to argue as best he could for more defence spending, that was really welcomed by military chiefs, though it didn't go far enough. And that's the big dilemma that they face. Right now, the military is facing a huge funding challenge. They've got a massive budget, but they're not spending it very well. And so in order to change that, you really need a defence secretary who at least has some kind of knowledge of the business and is going to be able to hit the ground running. And I think I know that there is concern within main building that this new defence secretary is going to have to take a while to get up to speed on what's going on. And the fact is, there really isn't that much time until the next election. And so the concern is that there will be now a period of stagnation when what defence actually needs is genuine transformation, because we've seen already shrinking army, we've seen the Navy struggling with things like recruitment, with getting enough ships out on time. There's a massive programme at the moment, really critical to renew our nuclear-armed submarines that carry the nuclear deterrent, which is one of the most important parts of the UK-US relationship. And so you really need a defence secretary that understands this vastly complex subject, and Grant Shapps just isn't that.
Great for us, the tenure of Ben Wallace as Defence Secretary, Deborah. I mean, you mentioned there the sort of declining status of some aspects of the military. I guess he was always arguing against that being the case, but ultimately, when you're Defence Secretary, it's your job to deliver both the funding by arguing for it in Cabinet and how that money's spent. Does that go down as a blemish on his tenure, or is ultimately his tenure seen as very successful?
That's a good question. I mean, he will obviously, in his resignation letter, talks about how he's leaving defence leaving the MOD in a better place than when he arrived back in 2019, and that's undeniably true. But what the reality is that it was in a terrible state back in 2019, and now it's in a slightly less terrible state, but it's still in a pretty terrible state. There's not an argument that everything is rosy. He was on a journey of modernisation, on a journey of transformation, on a journey of trying to embrace the technological change that defence needs to grasp fast in order not to be irrelevant in terms of its actual military capabilities. There's been so much talk about the army, the modernisation of the army, but the reality is right now it's fighting with vehicles that were made decades ago, with artillery that's far too few, and the plans to resupply and replenish them are only happening much too slowly. There's lots of really good ideas. There's lots of great people who know what good looks like, but translating ideas into actual reality on the battlefield is really complicated. And even Ben Wallace, after 4 years in the job, hadn't managed to achieve the kind of changes that I imagine privately he would have wanted to. And so I think defence right now is in a really vulnerable state. And the fact that the Prime Minister has decided to put somebody in that job who's going to communicate really well, spin the positives really well, maybe points to a Prime Minister who isn't prioritising defence as in terms of what's best for defence, and prioritising instead what's best for appearances.